Hello, kindergartners. I am going to tell you a missionary story today. We are so very blessed to live here in America where we have so many churches. Just about everywhere you look, you can find a church. And so we have many opportunities to learn about Jesus and to read his word. But there are still countries in this world where there are not a lot of churches, especially countries where there are villages that are very far away from regular type of living, children who still live in huts and who have to walk places and just don't have as much as we have. And perhaps they don't have churches. Well, I am going to tell you today about a little girl named Catarina, and she lived in a village just like the one that I just explained to you. There were no churches. There were no people all around telling her about Jesus, but there was one missionary family. This family had moved to this village. God had told them to go to this village to tell the people and to tell the children about Jesus. Well, one particular day, Katerina was looking out of her window and she saw the missionary woman. And she was holding a Sunday school class outside. Katerina could see her from her window, and the missionary woman was standing near a palm tree, and she had a circle of children around her, and she had a picture, and she was telling them some story about Jesus. But Katerina was so sad as she looked because her mother wouldn't let her go to the Sunday school. She had been 2 times before, but then her mother had decided that she could not go. And so as Katerina looked out the window, she asked one more time, Madre, could I please go to the Sunday school? But her mother said, No, Katerina, I don't know why, but it just doesn't feel good in my bones. I don't want you going to that Sunday school. Now, you run off and play. But Katerina could not run off and play because she felt so sad. She actually had a tear running down her cheek. She knew she was missing out on something very special. Even the 2 stories that she had heard about Jesus, she knew he was someone that she needed to learn more about. As she was walking past her father noticed the tear in her eye, and he said, Katerina, my dear daughter, why are you sad? And she said, I just really would like to go to Sunday school. And father said, Okay, I'll tell you what. We will make an agreement. I will let you go 10 times. You can go and you can hear one story for each finger. But listen carefully, because after those 10 fingers are filled up with a story, that is all that we will allow you to go. Well, that sounded like a fabulous agreement to Katerina. And so she rushed outside to join the other children. And she heard story after story. She went and she got a story for each finger. She went week after week and she heard different stories about Jesus and how he had been born and how he went around and preached the gospel and did great miracles. And each of her fingers were getting filled with the story. And it was almost time. The week 10 had come. She had already gone 9 times, and she was so eager to hear what her 10th story was going to be. But something very sad happened. Her mother and father had to pack up all of their belongings quickly and move to another village. Katerina went to the new village, and it was so much like her own village. It was the same, but there were no missionaries. Katerina looked around and she began to meet the children and she began to ask them, Who teaches the Sunday school? Where do you have your Sunday school? Who is your missionary? And the children were very confused. What is Sunday school, Katerina? They would ask. What is a missionary? What stories are you talking about? And so Catarina began to tell them about the special missionary in her old village, and how she had learned many stories. And she told them how the missionary would stand by a palm tree and put a picture up and would tell them about Jesus. And so the children said, Catarina, you can tell us stories. You can be our Sunday school teacher. What a great idea! Because Katerina knew 9 stories about Jesus. And so that is what she did. She gathered all the children together and she stood by a palm tree and she put up a piece of paper on that palm tree. Now, she didn't have the special pictures like the missionary woman had. And so she would tell the children what they would need to imagine was on that piece of paper. And so for her very first story, she told them, imagine that there are hills on this piece of paper, and there are sheep scattered across the hills, and the sky is dark, and there are shepherds out, and they are watching their sheep and they are talking, when all of a sudden a bright light shines and angels come and tell the shepherds that Jesus has been born. But the children said, well, Katerina, who is Jesus? Tell us, who is this Jesus? And so Katerina told those children everything that she had learned about Jesus. She told them about Jesus being born and about growing up and about healing people and about sick people who got well again. And she told them about Jesus dying and about him rising again. And when she told them all the stories, she would tell them again. She would tell them over and over. And the children began to learn these stories so much that they began to call each one of her fingers by a particular story. Her first finger was the shepherd story, and then there was the manger story, there was the temple story, the disciple story, the sick story, and then on her other hand, she had the lunch story, and she had the preaching story, and the cross story, and the resurrection story. But she never had a story for that last finger, and it always upset her a little bit. But she knew it would be okay, and once she had told all of those finger stories, she would start back at the beginning and tell them again. Well, something exciting happened one day. One day, a missionary family, a different missionary family than had lived in Katerina's old village, a new missionary family came to Katerina's new village. And the missionary woman gathered the children together under a palm tree, and she began to have Sunday school with them. And she began to tell them a story. And when she would tell them a story, the children would stop and say, oh, we know how that story ends. That's Katerina's third finger story. And the missionary woman was a little puzzled, but she began to tell them another story. And the children would say again, oh, yes, yes, we know that story too. That's Katerina's number 6 finger story. And the missionary woman began to wonder, who is this Catarina and what are all these finger stories that the children are talking about? And so she asked, and Catarina, who was very shy, had the courage to step forward and to tell the missionary woman how she had learned 9 stories about Jesus from another missionary in her old village, but how she did not have a story to go for her 10th finger. And then she asked the missionary, do you suppose you could tell me one more story so that I could have a story for my last finger? And the missionary woman smiled so big, and she said, oh, Caterina, you have made a story for yourself for that last finger. So, because you see, Catarina, after Jesus rose again, when he was up in the mountains with his disciples, he was getting ready to go back to heaven. And he told his disciples, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel." And Catarina, that is exactly what you have been doing. You have been teaching the gospel to all of your friends. And so from that day on, the children called Catarina's last finger her go ye finger. And I surely hope that just like Catarina was not afraid to share the gospel with her friends, she was so excited and she shared with them all she knew about Jesus. And I hope that you can do that too, that you can have the courage to tell all the stories and that you can go into all the world and tell your friends about the gospel too.